This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Jill Newbronner, and tonight's top stories. Mediators propose a 45-day ceasefire between Iran and the US, alongside reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The draft sent to both sides, but Washington and Tehran have yet to respond. Beijing and Tokyo also working to de-escalate tensions. Japanese leader Sanai Takaichi arranging summit talks with Iran. South Korea moves to send special envoys to key oil producers in the Middle East as the Strait of Hormuz disruption threatens supplies. South Korean lawmakers say North Korea is distancing itself from Iran, citing intelligence assessments. Pyongyang seen to be keeping the door open for possible talks with Washington. Also tonight, Taiwan's opposition leader heads to China on what she calls a peace mission. We ask an expert what's on the table and who stands to gain. Plus, China's EV boom is helping to shield drivers and businesses from the oil price shock. But can it cushion the blow for the wider economy? Mediators in the Middle East have proposed a 45-day ceasefire between Iran and the US, which includes the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. A draft has been sent to both sides as the clock ticks down on a threat by President Donald Trump to unleash hell on Iran. The proposal includes a commitment from Iran to not pursue nuclear weapons in exchange for sanctions relief and the release of frozen assets. The plan is put forward by Egyptian, Pakistani and Turkish mediators. Reports say it needs to be agreed today. Mediators are hoping the 45-day window will give enough time for talks to reach a permanent ceasefire. And Washington has yet to respond, while the senior Iranian official says Tehran is reviewing the proposal. But he emphasized that Iran will not be forced to accept deadlines under pressure. The official says Tehran will not reopen the strategic waterway in exchange for a temporary ceasefire, and it believes the U.S. is not ready for a permanent truce. Iran has condemned Mr. Trump's threats to destroy their power plants and bridges.
These threats are simply an indication of a criminal mindset. This is an express public incitement for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Mr. Trump issued an expletive-laden ultimatum on Sunday, warning that Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one. The war has triggered a global energy crunch, and diplomatic efforts are ramping up from beyond the Middle East. Top diplomats from China and Russia say they are willing to work together to help de-escalate tensions. Japan also looking to arrange summit talks with Iran and secure the safe passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi speaking to Parliament. She's saying Tokyo has already completed many rounds of coordination with Tehran. So let's get more. Our CNA senior correspondent, Michio Ishida, joining us live from Tokyo. You heard there many rounds of coordination, according to Sanai Takaichi. Is that what you're hearing on the ground as well?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background. It's during the upper house budget session this morning. Constitutional Democratic Party member, the member of the largest opposition party, referred to Japan's long-standing good ties with Iran and that Japan should maximize that relations to stop the war in the Middle East. And to that, Prime Minister Takaichi responded that dialogue was taking many times. Talks with the Iranian leader was being worked on. But Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara, during his regular news conference, denied that a phone call was about to happen between Japan and Iran leaders. Now, Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi had been speaking to Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. They have known each other for a long time, as Mr. Araghchi served as ambassador to Japan for 3 years. And there's been no particular harsh comments reported towards Japan from the Iranian side so far since they were attacked by the U.S. and Israel. Two Japanese, however, were taken hostage by Iran. Mr. Motegi said one was released last month and was back in Japan, but the government has not given any details on who they were and who the remaining one person was.
Right now, there's no doubt that Japan is one of the countries that's really facing the brunt of the war in Iran. Where is that being felt most acutely?
Well, actually, the impact is not felt so heavily, by the common public, by the general public. Japanese airlines have announced they were hiking airfares. From June, Japan Airlines and All Nippon Airways plan to double at most fuel surcharge. Cost of living is higher, but then that's been the trend during the past 2 years. We hear companies, in particular construction firms, medical institutes, expressing worries of shortage of naphtha supplies made of crude oil, crucial for construction materials and medical supplies. For Japan, over 90% of crude oil comes from the Middle East through the Strait of Hormuz. Japan had about 250 days worth of reserve oil before the International Energy Agency called for its release to help countries suffering from severe shortage. Now, immediately after the U.S.-Israel attack on Iran, 45 Japanese vessels were stuck in the Persian Gulf, unable to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And during the past week, 3 Japanese-related vessels passed carrying liquefied natural gas and liquefied petroleum gas. Now, there's no clarity whether they are headed for Japan or to other countries, but still 42 Japanese vessels are in the Persian Gulf. Japan External Trade Organization in its report says Japan has 1 year worth of LNG in stock. Now, so far, the Japanese government is not calling for the public to conserve electricity or refrain from driving their cars. Some analysts here say Ms. Takaichi may be more afraid of damping consumer sentiment by calling for self-restraint, as the government is constantly assuring its people there is no lack of supplies at this point in time. But, of course, depending on how long the Middle East crisis continue, Japan could be hit hard.
All right, that live update from Tokyo, Michio Ishida, many thanks for that. South Korea is moving to send special envoys to key Middle East oil producers as disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz threaten crude supplies. Seoul is seeking talks with Saudi Arabia, Oman and Algeria. And these are countries with alternative routes to supply crude oil. Authorities are pushing to send 5 Korean-flagged vessels to the city of Yanbu on Saudi Arabia's Red Sea coast. President Lee Jae-myung says South Korea has no choice but to accept some risk to secure supply.
위험성이 조금 있다고 원천 봉쇄하거나 하면 대한민국 전체 원유 공급 문제에 심각한 영향을 미쳐서 국가나 국민들에게 너무 위협이 크니까 그 균형을 잘 맞춰야 됩니다. 무조건 100% 안전 위해서 조금의 위험 있으면 다 막 금지시키고 이렇게 하면 국내 원유 공급 문제는 어떻게 하겠어요? 그런 점도 감안을 해서 위험을 조금씩은 감수할 수밖에 없는 상황이 오는 거죠, 지금은.
Seoul is preparing to release strategic oil reserves to private refiners to ease the shortage, with swaps to follow once overseas shipments arrive. South Korean lawmakers citing the National Spy Agency says North Korea appears to be distancing itself from Iran.
이란에 대해서 무기와 물자를 지원하지 않고 있을 뿐더러 오히려 이란의 최고 지도자 하메네이가 죽었을 때 조전을 보내지 않고 있고, 또한 무스타파 둘째 아들이 최고 지도자로 선출되었을 때도 축전을 보내지 않는 등 이란과의 전통적 우호 관계에서 오히려 거리를 두려는 모습을 보이고 있습니다.
Seoul's National Intelligence Service sees this as an attempt to leave the door open for talks with the United States, with President Donald Trump expected to visit China in May. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un previously said Washington and Pyongyang can get along well if the U.S. recognizes it as a nuclear state. Seoul says Pyongyang is also developing carbon fiber intercontinental ballistic missiles designed to carry multiple warheads, making them harder to detect or intercept. In March, it conducted a ground test of a solid-fuel rocket engine believed to be part of its intercontinental ballistic missile program. Experts say the new engine likely delivers greater thrust, giving it more power to reach the U.S. mainland. Meanwhile, South Korea's president has expressed regret over a drone incursion into the north, calling it irresponsible and reckless. Those indicted include a graduate student in his 30s, an employee of Seoul's Chief Intelligence Service, as well as a military officer. Coming up on East Asia tonight, more ships attempting to make it through the Strait of Hormuz as investors await clarity on the status of talks between the U.S. and Iran. Plus, the Bank of Japan warns of hits to the economy from the Middle East conflict in its latest report. Welcome back to the show as we start your business segment, and welcome to Olivia Mazuki, who's got that news for us. And Liv, supply is tight, prices of oil are high. What's OPEC doing about it? Are they in any position at all to calm the market?
Not really, Jill. So even with a planned output hike, the disruptions in the Gulf mean that extra barrels may not fully reach the market, keeping prices under pressure. So speaking of prices, crude oil easing slightly following reports of a ceasefire proposal between the U.S. and Iran, but still holding above $100 a barrel over supply concerns. A modest output increase from OPEC Plus nations having limited impact. Key oil producers, led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, have agreed to hike production targets for May by 206,000 barrels per day. But that increase exists largely on paper, as ongoing war-driven disruptions in the Persian Gulf mean that the additional supply cannot fully materialize on the ground. A key OPEC Plus committee that oversees output compliance and market conditions has warned that supply risks could linger for long after the Iran conflict ends. It said restoring damaged energy infrastructure will be a slow and expensive process, and the uncertainty may keep markets volatile in the near term. A further threat to already tight oil supplies is hoarding. International Energy Agency's Executive Director, Fatih Birol, has urged countries to avoid hoarding oil and fuel, warning that it could harm neighboring economies. For Asia in particular, Mr. Birol said any export ban or restriction should be reconsidered because the impact on the region will be dramatic. JP Morgan warned last week oil may top a record high of $150 per barrel if disruptions at the Strait of Hormuz persists into mid-May. An oil tanker carrying Iraqi crude was able to pass through the critical choke point, according to the latest data from LSCG and Kepler. And that comes a day after Iran said its neighbor had special exemption to use the waterway. Two experts we spoke with earlier weighed in on how volatile oil prices could feed into recession risks as the Middle East conflict drags on.
It is meaningful because what's happening in the Middle East is effectively taken about 10 million barrels of oil per day away from the markets. If there is significant damage to energy infrastructure, then even if this crisis comes to pass, it'll take some time for the supply to come on stream, which is why, OPEC's promise to increase supply is something that's on paper. Whether they can actually fulfill that remains to be seen, and that's going to linger in the background, affect markets, create more volatility.
So if you look at the spot market for Brent oil, for instance, it's already pretty close to 150. So the physical delivery is already being, done around that level. Of course, if you look at the futures prices, it's maybe around 110. It's in the realm of possibility, but the geopolitical developments that are consistent with $150 per barrel, it's a pretty bad one for the Asia Pacific. Our thinking here is that the product market is already pretty close to a crunch. And even if economies like the U.S. is relatively shielded from the shock, U.S. consumers and businesses, they still feel the brunt of the spikes in products because we're dealing with the global markets here. So if you look at the gasoline prices, it's already above $4 per barrel. And that's going to create political pressure. So we stick to our base case of eventual de-escalation, but it really requires that both parties do not escalate further from here, because that might affect the infrastructure for energy and the production of energy in the region.
And if there is some kind of an agreement, ceasefire, then, markets will take comfort. Even if oil prices remain elevated, I mean, just the fact that we have a ceasefire could see all that liquidity on the sidelines. There's a lot of liquidity, by the way, going into play. Okay. Because investors, being investors, have to invest their money somewhere. So if the backdrop improves, you could see that money going to work. But for now, a lot of the money is sitting on the sidelines, watching what's happening in the Middle East very carefully.
But if you face the situation where there's further escalation, and the global economy spending on oil reaches maybe 6 to 7%, there's kind of a rule of thumb among economists that if you reach that level, you really start to face recession risk. We're not there yet, but if we reach the situation where the barrels start costing 150 per barrel, then we might be facing more drastic impact on the global economy. Again, there's a political logic of de-escalation for both U.S. and Iran. And we never know, given the usual kind of a Trumpian rhetoric here, what will happen in the end. But if you reach that kind of oil price, then certainly we're in trouble. But we still have to wait for the kind of greater clarity here.
More ships are attempting to run the gauntlet to exit the Strait of Hormuz, but not all are succeeding. 2 Indian-flagged LPG tankers are confirmed to have exited the strait: Green Asha and Green Sunvi, en route to India. An LNG tanker, Mitsui's Soha, crossed the strait last week, but was said to be empty at the point of exit. But today, 2 LNG-laden tankers from Qatar retreated after initially attempting to traverse the strait, according to ship tracking data. Both of them had picked up their loads from Qatar's plant just before the outbreak of hostilities and have been idling till the current movement. One ship, the Al Adayan, is signaling it is headed for China, that is Qatar's biggest LNG buyer. Qatar has delivered shipments to Kuwait over the last few weeks, but these did not require running the Hormuz gauntlet. The country is one of the world's biggest suppliers of LNG, having supplied about a fifth of all LNG last year, and the disruption is roiling gas markets globally, sending prices sharply higher. The Bank of Japan is warning that tensions in the Middle East could weigh on the country's economy and complicate plans for a possible interest rate hike as early as this month. The central bank says war-linked surge in oil prices and supply disruptions are already hurting some firms, raising concerns over profits and consumer spending. In a quarterly report based on regional surveys, the BOJ noted that companies are feeling pressure from higher input costs and shortage of raw materials. While lawmakers have debated the risk of wartime inflation, the report highlights growing downside risks to economic growth. Markets have been rattled since the conflict disrupted shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, pushing up oil prices and the dollar against the yen. Now, despite all these risks, the BOJ keeps its upbeat view of regional economies, supported by tourism and rising pay, although some firms warn that wage plans could change if the conflict worsens. And U.S. President Trump's fresh threats against Iran are also weighing on the traditional safe haven gold. Bullion has declined by as much as 1.4% to about 4,600 an ounce at one point in Asian trading, now hovering at levels around 4,690. That is about a 13% slide from where gold prices had been before the start of the war on Iran. Safe haven demand for gold has been fading as surging oil prices stoke inflation concerns. And Asia-Pacific stock markets are off to a solid start to the week, even amid war escalation worries after President Trump doubled down on his threats to target Iran's infrastructure if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened by Tuesday. Tokyo shares, they're up by more than 1%. Shares in Seoul pairing earlier gains to close at 1.3% higher. Investor sentiment got a boost after South Korean official hinted at the possibility of the government drawing up another supplementary budget for the second half of the year. The government already rolled out a $17 billion extra budget last week, aimed at easing the burden of soaring oil prices to households and businesses. China's rapid EV push is building a buffer from the global fuel supply shocks. Still, with no end in sight for the Iran war, the world's largest crude importer may not be fully immune from the consequences of prolonged oil turmoil.
Energy transition is in full swing in China. In places like this depot in northern Hebei province, electric fleets are replacing diesel trucks as operators try to cut reliance on imported fuel.
少有这个，因为咱们国这原油还是它不够，咱们国这个全靠进口，不是？我感觉是这个新能源这个电车对咱们国内运输啊，或不管是咱们家庭用，最实惠的。
From rural roads to city streets, electric vehicles are now a common sight.
因为确实是方便，因为家里像这种的它还会贵一些，如果家里的话，自己安充电桩会更便宜，就是比这个要便宜多，就更合适了。
The massive EV adoption is seen to have insulated the immediate impact of global fuel shortage. Analysts see this trend as strategically important.
Yeah, China is one of the most resilient major economies in the world when it comes to the oil shocks happening right now. And we are also looking at how EV adoption, the longer-term strategies about like making sure the electricity grid is not dependent on purely dependent on high LNG prices. Like all of these strategies are actually paying off very well. Oil consumption in China, coming from road transport, is actually going to be not leading the growth anymore, and in fact, it could be driving China's oil consumption going to decline.
For drivers, cost stability matters, especially in times of geopolitical turbulence.
你肯定有关系吧？你打仗以后油贵了，马上又涨价了。像那个电车，电始终这个价，基本上跳一跳多少钱？像人家油一涨1块涨2块，差多少钱呢？现在油车现在已经跑不动了，还跑不起，你运价低，它跑不起。
But China remains the world's largest crude importer. So prolonged conflicts like the Iran war can still ripple through the economy. That's as the auto sector still accounts for at least 40% of the country's oil consumption. Petrochemicals, aviation, and manufacturing also depend on imported energy. EVs may cushion the temporary energy shock, but cannot fully put a brake on it.
China has issued new guidelines for its e-commerce sector to promote higher quality industry development, according to state media. The move comes a week after EU lawmakers visited to discuss challenges and competition. Last month, the bloc agreed to clamp down on e-commerce platforms that sold illegal or unsafe products. A scandal broke out in France in November after the country's consumer watchdog found that Shein sold childlike sex dolls on its platform. Trade ties with China remain strained over imbalances, with the bloc recording a deficit of over $350 billion in 2024. China's new guidelines were jointly issued by several ministries and regulators. They call for balancing promotion and regulation, integrating digital and real economies, and creating pilot zones for e-commerce activities. And analysts say that the move is constructive, but unlikely to fully resolve ongoing e-commerce disputes. And Jill, that's all I have for you. Back to you.
Thank you so much for the update, Liv. Coming up on East Asia tonight, Taiwan's opposition leader invited by China's president to visit Beijing. What do both sides hope to gain? Well, we'll speak to Professor Yu Hua Chen for more insight. This is East Asia Tonight. Here are the headlines we're following. Mediators propose a 45-day ceasefire between Iran and the United States, alongside reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The draft sent to both sides, but Washington and Tehran have yet to respond. Japan joining the push for diplomacy. Sanai Takaichi says she's arranging summit talks with Iran while seeking a separate phone call with Donald Trump. South Korea acts to stabilize the supply of oil. Lawmakers agreeing to send special envoys to Middle Eastern countries that can bypass Hormuz. Taiwan's main opposition leader will visit China from tomorrow amid tensions between Beijing and the island's DPP-led government. China sees Taiwan as its own territory and has slammed the DPP as separatists. Cheng Li-wen's trip comes just weeks before U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to visit Beijing. Taiwan's opposition-dominated parliament is stalling a government plan for $40 billion in extra defense spending. The U.S. is Taiwan's most important security backer and has intensified pressure on the island's opposition lawmakers to approve a proposal for defense purchases. Ms. Cheng says she wants to meet President Xi Jinping to build cross-strait peace, but China has yet to confirm if he will meet her. So for more, we're joined by Associate Professor Yu Hua Chen from the Global Studies Program at Akita International University. Professor, I suspect you might feel that Taiwan's opposition gets more out of this trip than China. But if we were to stick on the China's perspective, given that we don't know if Xi Jinping will even meet her, what is China seeking to get out of this meeting?
All right. I think China wants to gain a very key, important influence of communication inside Taiwan, want to secure Zheng Li-wen's political survival. Zheng, once she became a chairwoman of the KMT, and she has expressed a number of times she wants to visit China and say Taiwan should unify with China, and also say every people in Taiwan, they are all Chinese. But China has been waiting for quite a while to observe what she say and what she did. And then the offer came just a couple of days ago, on the 30th of May. And the timing is very important to understand Beijing's rationale of this invitation, because on the same day, there were a couple of U.S. lawmakers visit Taiwan in order to support Taiwanese government's defense budget. So Beijing probably want to support Zheng Li-wen as well, because she was the one who blocked the defense budget in the Congress of Taiwan. And also, there's another pro-Chinese figure in Taiwan politics called Ke Wen-je. He was just sentenced guilty for 17 years in jail a couple of days ago. So I think right now the timing is very crucial to understand Beijing's offer to Zheng Li-wen. Beijing wants to secure the only political influence communication inside Taiwan.
Interesting you should mention that about the timing, because we also know it's coming ahead of Donald Trump's visit to China, as well as a time when, cross-strait ties are still tense.
Yes, right now the cross-strait relation has been very tense, especially Taiwan is kind of at a crossfire between U.S.-China rivalries. And we do see Washington's try to pressure Taiwanese government, also Taiwanese opposition party. And some people say people in Washington also suggest Zheng Li-wen to visit the United States, right? But Zheng Li-wen chose to visit China. So from this example, you can see how much pressure that people in Taiwan, those political elites, suffer the pressure from the two sides.
Do you think that this is a bit of a political gamble, perhaps, for the KMT? Because on one hand, they could come out with a strengthened argument saying, look, we know how to handle China. We have a good relationship with Beijing. But on the other hand, it could swing the other way. They could be seen as being overly compliant or accommodating to Beijing.
Yes, I would say this is a very risky political gamble for Zheng Li-wen. Let me give you 4 figures according to multiple surveys conducted by National Zhengzhi University and also Mainland Affairs Council, right? 3, 60, 75, and 80. Only 3% of people in Taiwan saying they are Chinese, and around 60% people in Taiwan prefer the status quo over the Taiwan Strait. 75 people in Taiwan say PRC and Taiwan, they do not belong to each other. And 80% of them oppose one country, two systems. So as you from those figures, you will know whatever Zheng Liwen say and do in China probably is not going to be very welcome by majority of people in Taiwan. So I would say this visit is very, very risky. And as a matter of fact, many even people inside the KMT are openly publicly oppose this Zheng Liwen's visit because they are worried whatever Zheng say and does in China will going to impact the local elections, which is coming in November of this year.
Absolutely. Also watching the trip very closely, I'm sure, will be Washington. What message do you think that this visit is sending them? In the context that Taiwan has to balance relations between China and the U.S. very carefully.
I think if I were Washington, I would say Zheng Liwen sent 100% a very clear message to the United States that Zheng is 100% for China figure. Because as I mentioned, people in Washington have suggested what Zheng Liwen need to visit the United States, but Zheng Liwen chose to visit China. And also, people in the United States are hoping the KMT can pass the defense budget, but Zheng Liwen was the one who blocked this budget in the Congress of Taiwan for months. So if we use the saying that Beijing always say, let's listen to what they say and observe what they do, I think the conclusion of Beijing on assessment Zheng Liwen is very clear. Zheng is 100% clear for China figure.
We can't ignore the wider context of the Iran war right now. And for Taiwan, it's being squeezed by the conflict. It does need gas at the end of the day to power its chip factories. It is heading into summer, which are hot months. Could this visit actually present a very real opportunity for China to step in?
I think it's very unlikely. As much as I know, people in Taiwan, politicians in Taiwan, they don't really want to get involved in affairs in the Middle East. And I think Zheng Liwen's statement is all about how to talk about saying things that in Beijing's favor, like the 92 consensus, one country, two systems, or one China principle, and so on and so forth. We haven't seen Zheng Liwen talking too much about the affairs in the Middle East yet.
Okay, just a final question. What are you looking to come out of tomorrow in terms of solid agreements or perhaps in some shape or form that could, on the home front be taken as adjusting its policies or having an impact on the political landscape back home in Taiwan?
I think, number one, if Zheng Liwen is able to see Xi Jinping in person, right? Because right now, Beijing is, Beijing is not 100% trust Zheng Liwen, right? Because Zheng Liwen seems to be very optimistic over her past careers. So that is why Beijing tried to say, we invite Zheng Liwen, but it doesn't say whether Zheng Liwen is able to see Xi Jinping at the end of the day. So I think Zheng Liwen's first stop is Jiangsu and then Shanghai. I think there will be the time whether there would be the time Beijing try to observe Zheng Liwen, this person. And if Zheng Liwen is able to say something Beijing wants to hear, like Taiwan should be unified with China under one country, two systems, or 92 consensus based on one China principle. And I think if that happens, then Zheng Liwen is probably able to see Xi Jinping herself.
Okay, we won't have long to wait. Tomorrow we will know more. Meanwhile, we thank you very much, Associate Professor Yu Hua Chen from the Global Studies Program at Akita International University. And you can head over to our website, cna.asia, or our mobile app for more, including this analysis of what Ms. Zheng's trip signifies. Looks like more trouble for popular online gaming platform Roblox, effectively banned in China. It now faces a potential ban in the Philippines amid mounting concerns over alleged illegal activity targeting children. The government is set to meet with the company's representatives tomorrow. Jacob Lazaro reports for CNA from Metro Manila.
The Philippines is a major and growing market for Roblox, with millions of daily active users in the country. It's one of the leading apps for Filipino children aged 16 and below. But it's not all fun and games. Local authorities say they continue to receive reports about Filipino children being exposed to dangerous content on the app. including violence, drug trafficking, and sexual predation. In some cases, adult players pretend to be minors to win the trust of other children, eventually moving their conversation to a more private and outside channel. There, the predator can continue to groom and coerce the child into sexual or criminal activity. Amid such reports, the Philippine government has given Roblox executives an ultimatum to physically come to Manila to discuss how to strengthen child protection measures. It proposes improved real-time monitoring of in-game communications that can flag malicious users, as well as an enhanced identity verification system integrated with the Philippine National ID database for faster identification and apprehension. If Roblox does not comply, the Criminal Investigation and Coordinating Center, or CICC, says it's already secured commitments from local telecommunications company to suspend or even ban the app. Countries such as China, Russia, Turkey, and Iraq have already banned or blocked Roblox over similar concerns. Depending on the outcome of the discussions, the Philippines may end up joining the list.
Still to come in East Asia tonight, a grand ceremony in China to honor the Yellow Emperor. More on the occasion when we come back. You're with East Asia tonight, where more details have emerged on the high-risk mission by the U.S. military to rescue a pilot whose plane was shot down in Iran. CNA's Yasmin Yonkers tells us more.
President Trump declared, "We got him," after the daring mission to extract the wounded soldier. But how did the U.S. military get behind enemy lines to rescue the second airman who went missing in Iran in the middle of a raging war? Here's what we've gathered of the 48-hour operation from various media reports quoting unidentified U.S. officials. Well, these images from Iranian state media were the first indications of the downed U.S. fighter jet, set to show fragments, including a tail fin with a red stripe. An expert said that this was consistent with the plane model, that's the F-15E Strike Eagle. Two crew had ejected from the plane. The missing airman was apparently a weapons system officer, usually seated behind the pilot, who was rescued within hours of the crash. Reports say the airman spent 2 days in the mountains of Iran's province of Kogiluye and Boye Ahmad. He was injured but could still walk, hiking more than 2,000 meters up a mountain ridge and then hiding in a crevice. He was armed with a pistol, a beacon, and communication device. The CIA is said to have tracked his location and then passed the information to the Pentagon. Israel was also said to have helped with the intelligence. And New York Times reports commandos from Navy SEAL Team 6 extracted the airman. The report adds the CIA also apparently used a deception campaign to throw off the Iranians, who had offered a $60,000 reward for the airman's capture. And the agency spread word that the airman had been found and was on the move out of Iran. This operation did not go without a hitch, though. 2 Hercules HC-130J transport planes sent to rescue the airman and the special forces needed help. They were stuck, it's unclear why, in a remote base near Isfahan, set up specially for the rescue mission. Another 3 HC-130Js were sent in to get everyone out. The U.S. military blew up the 2 planes that were stuck, reportedly to prevent the high-tech aircraft from falling into Iranian hands. Iranian state TV aired video of what it said was wreckage from the U.S. rescue operation. It claimed to have shot down 2 transport planes and 2 Black Hawks. It's also said that the rescue operation killed 5 people in Iran.
Earlier, CNA spoke to Alan Beam at the Australia Institute. He said while operations demonstrated U.S. military expertise, there may be clear signs of operational panic.
Well, it's evident, I think, Julie, that the United States is well capable of conducting very, very complex operations such as this one. It is the biggest military in the world, and I'm sure that the United States military learned a lot of lessons after the abortive attempt back in 1980 during President Carter's administration. So they really do know how to do these things. They have factored in all sorts of problems that might occur, including, as one understands it, the problems in with the two Hercules, which I think got their nose wheels bogged or something like that. So they swept all of that up and they rescued the weapons officer, and they seem to have got their force out. So it was a brilliantly executed operation, but one has to ask the more fundamental question: what on earth is the purpose of an operation like that when you're bogged in a war which appears to have no end?
Well, this rescue, Alan, also happened deep inside hostile territory. That's another factor here. What does this tell us then about how far the United States is willing to go operationally inside Iran right now? And was this a one-off recovery mission, or was there more to that?
I don't think, Yasmin, that the United States wants to put forces on the ground and conduct land warfare in Iran. I think that would be extremely dangerous for the United States and very dangerous for its troops. I mean, the Iranian army is pretty well trained and it's very capable. So I don't think that's where they'd go. At the same time, the United States has demonstrated in Venezuela and again here that with special operations, it is highly skilled and very flexible. So it will do these kinds of operations again when it's necessary, but I don't think that they're going to want to do them too often. So the use of F-15s, for example, I think will be highly controlled. They're likely to use them, but they will be taking even more precautions to make sure that the aircraft are not shot down. All in all, I think there are signs of operational panic in this particular exercise, essentially because it's a mopping up operation with very little purpose other than to rescue the weapons officer. So, you know, it's not a good sign of a well-conducted war.
And I want to get your reaction to President Trump's blunt, curse-filled message, Alan. How is that likely to land in Tehran? Does it strengthen U.S. leverage or harden Iran's position?
Look, I don't think that President Trump has got much in the way of leverage at the moment. Iran has got an enormous capacity to endure the punishment that the United States is handing out militarily, and it has done that before. It will do it again. It's a war that you're not going to win through military means. It's a war that has to be negotiated through. All wars are the same, really. They're political exercises rather than simply military ones. And for President Trump, he doesn't appear to understand the difference between the use of military force and the use of political persuasion. And at this point, it would appear to me at least that President Trump is conducting a war without purpose, and the Iranians understand that and are able to make life very uncomfortable for the US president simply by striking the friends and allies of the United States in the Gulf, thereby causing this massive energy crisis that we're all enduring at the moment, whether it's in Singapore, where you are, or in Australia, where we are.
Now, astronauts on the historic Artemis 2 mission have reached a tipping point in their lunar flyby. They've officially arrived at a spot where the moon's gravity takes over, pulling on the spacecraft more strongly than the Earth's. The Orion capsule is now preparing to whip around the lunar far side, a high-speed maneuver that will catapult these astronauts deeper into space than any human being in history. The astronauts are now roughly 63,000 kilometers away from the moon and around 3 times that distance from from home. Earlier today, the crew took in the sights of the lunar surface as the spacecraft crossed the two-thirds mark of their journey. Now, NASA is emphasizing the significance of human eyes seeing these features rather than robotic explorers. The crew is reportedly most excited about seeing the moon's Orion-Tale basin, a massive crater resembling a bullseye. While it has been photographed by orbiting probes, this will be the first time it is seen by human eyes. Americans in the Midwest were treated to a slice of Japan over the weekend. The annual Cherry Blossom Day in Columbus, Ohio, aims to introduce Americans to aspects of Japanese culture. Visitors can try putting on a kimono, folding origami, or even learn about bonsai trees. There were even live sumo demonstrations and an anime workshop.
So event like this, community event like this, can actually bring both communities together. So you saw so many different people, not just Japanese people, but the people from different backgrounds, different generations, enjoying Japanese traditions together.
The Chinese authorities are stepping up transport services to deal with the more than 840 million domestic trips expected during a spring break that coincides with the traditional Qingming festival. The annual Tomb Sweeping Day sees people travelling across the country to pay tribute to their ancestors. China is hoping the travellers will also do some sightseeing to boost domestic consumption. About 295 million cross-regional passenger trips took place on the first day of Qingming, and that's up 2.7% on year. It estimates overall traffic during the period to increase by about 6% compared to last year. In Shaanxi province, a grand ceremony was held on Tomb Sweeping Day itself, paying tribute to the Yellow Emperor, also known as Huangdi. He is considered to be the founder of Chinese civilization and the common ancestor of its people. Well, that is Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. I want to leave you now with more of the festivities honouring the Yellow Emperor.